Hey everyone, David Aragona and Ashley Mailloux are taking a look at one of the Grade 1 races on Saturday at Woodbine. Race 6 is Grade 1 Summer Stakes for the 2-year-olds, going a mile on the turf course around one turn. And Ashley, as we throw up the field for this race, interesting situation is there was a large field entered from the Natelma, and some of the connections have cross-entered their fillies in this race. So a field of 11, but 4 of them are fillies that are also entered in the Natelma.
And it's very similar to what we saw just about a month ago on King's Plate Day with the Soaring Free and the Catch a Glimpse. Horses were cross-entered. You're not sure which horses are going where, which I think makes it a little bit more challenging to handicap. But whether it's, fillies against the boys in this race in particular, if you like some of the fillies, I think they can be well respected against the boys, especially with their age and kind of the conditions of this race.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this race as if it holds together as drawn, but I would imagine some of the fillies will participate in the Natelma instead. We'll see how that plays out over the next few days. Either way, I think the favorite is going to be the horse that is pegged as the favorite on the morning line, the number 3, My Boy Prince, who has been very impressive in his recent starts for trainer Mark Casse, stretching out in distance for this race. And let's take a look at where he'll be placed on the Timeform US pace projector as we check out how these runners could sort themselves out in the early stages. And Ashley, with a lot horses stretching out in distance from sprints to a route for the first time, wouldn't be surprised to see a fast pace develop as is indicated on this pace projector.
Not at all. That seems very likely, looking at even, a couple other horses in here that might be pressing My Boy Prince. They're coming out of some races where the opening halves were very fast, 44-1, for example, 44-2, those sorts of sprint-like speed. And whether they can go a mile is a question. And for several of these horses, maybe it's not the distance that's the question, but it's also the surface.
One horse not shown on the pace projector is the number 2, Carson's Run. He'd be kind of off the screen, doesn't possess a whole lot of early speed, but he does get the LP flag in the Timeform US pace projector, indicating that he has the highest late pace rating in the field. Well, let's go through this field in post position order, discussing each one of the 11 runners, beginning with the number 1, Super Attentive. And this horse likely to be a long shot in this race. He's a maiden coming in off just one start. Did pick up some ground that day, closing belatedly to get up for 4th behind Western Whirl, another runner that's in this field. He's one of quite a few Mark Casse runners in this race that he figures to be among the bigger prices.
Mark Casse is locked and loaded for sure, to say the least. And, the debut, though, was pretty good. It was going 7/8 off that performance. You would think a mile or even further down the road, based on pedigree, this horse wants to go even longer than a 1-turn mile, which is the setup you'll get on the EP Taylor at Woodbine. He took a little bit of respect in that spot, and I think he lost some ground, too, in that race, David, but the pace helped. We think the pace will be hot here. He's still going to be closing. Whether he's good enough to compete with some of these other horses that just have a little bit more race day experience is the big question.
The number 2 is Carson's Run. Let's take a look at his most recent start when he was the runner-up in the Grade 3 with Anticipation at Saratoga. Actually lost to a filly this day as Gala Brand followed up her impressive debut victory to win here against the boys. Carson's Run is pretty game fighting back inside of that filly as they come onto the finish. These two just swallowed up the leaders, despite the fact that the pace was not particularly fast in this race. They were clearly the 2 best horses in here. Now Carson's Run coming back against a field that, again, includes some fillies, but figures to get a good pace setup this time.
I think so. You mentioned both the races in New York were not fast in terms of the early pace, and this horse typically closes from off of it. 2 starts now, I should say. And I think in the case of Galabran, I like that you pointed out that Carson was game on the inside, because I think with Galabran on the outside, she had an advantage. She certainly had clear run throughout. It's sometimes hard for horses to battle back on the inside, but Carson's Run, I thought, was very game in the stretch.
Yeah, and Christophe Clement has 5 runners up to Woodbine in recent years. He's 7 for 21 on the Woodbine turf, 270 ROI. Let's move on to the number 3, My Boy Prince, who's likely to go favorite in this race. And we'll check out the replay of his most recent start, a smashing 14-length victory in the Simcoe Stakes, going 6.5 furlongs on the Tapeta surface. And actually, 2 big questions with this horse, because he's been so impressive. So we know he has ability, but can he handle the turf? And also, how is he going to handle the stretch out in distance with some other speed signed on?
Yeah, those are going to be the big questions. He's the prime example of the turf being a factor, and we just don't know. You would think with the Tapeta, you would hope that this horse is turf, but you just simply don't know until race day. It's very different. And this horse has just gotten better with each of his starts, which I think is very impressive. In his debut, he faced several runners, which he'll have to face again in the Grade 1 summer, but visually looked dazzling. It seemed like that little bit of a freshening also did him well in between his graduation score and the Simcoe, but different waters, and you mentioned it as well, the pace scenario. I don't think they're going to let him get lonely on the lead, especially with these horses coming out of some really fast in general races.
Yeah, those are the big questions he has to answer. One thing I'll note about that Simcoe Stakes that he won last time out is it was a really weak field. I think the 3rd through 7th place finishers were all maiden, so we'll see if he can step up against this tougher field, but he's got those questions with regard to distance and surface. I looked up a variety of stats for trainer Mark Casse, and one that kind of stuck out to me was this. 2-year-old's last out winner is going from a sprint to route. He's just 2 for 37, 5% with a 34-cent ROI, so we'll see if he, my boy Prince, can transition from the sprint to route and actually show up in this summer stakes. The number 4 is Tunchi. Let's take a look at his last start when he was a maiden winner, going 6.5 furlongs on the turf course. And the switch to turf really seemed to agree with this horse, though he had some trouble in his prior start, probably ran a little better than it looks in those 2 synth races, but handled the turf last time, charging down the center of the course to win, going away at the end like a horse who's not supposed to have a problem with some added distance.
No, he shouldn't. And I think looking at the way that he was able to kind of hit his best stride late here in a 6.5 event should really bode well stretching out to the mile. It looked like to me in the stretch, he's a little bit of a grinder. It took him a while to get going, to figure out what he was being asked, but then he was able to open up pretty nicely. And I like that his numbers, he's had a little bit of a progression with each and every start. And a big thing that I think helped was he did race with blinkers last time out. Prior to that, he was a little bit more forward. And I don't think he had a late punch, where I think with the blinkers, even though, blinkers usually put speed into a horse, he just seemed like he was more focused and comfortable with the blinkers on.
The number 5 is Go With Gusto. Let's take a look at her maiden win, although I'll say win in quotation marks as it was taken away from her because she was disqualified and placed 5th for interference that you're going to see it right here in the stretch as she angles out pretty abruptly to get into the clear right there and fouls another horse. But she does win this race pretty convincingly, crossing the wire ahead of a field that was a group of males. It should be noted she already faced the boys on this day. We'll see if she participates here or in the Natala, because she is one of those that is cross-entered in both spots.
And it is nice to see her perform like that on the turf. You wonder a little bit if the rider would have waited just a little bit longer to angle out, what would have happened. It's tough to say, just knowing that other horse, ended up being right behind her, and she did cause interference in the end. So I think it was the right choice. But overall, good performance. Can she build off of it is the question. This is certainly going to be a test in terms of the caliber. But like I said, distance and surface didn't seem to be an issue on debut.
Yeah, this one definitely has potential. She is the younger half-sister to Pegasus World Cup winner Mucho Gusto, though obviously she's one that prefers turf as of now. Another filly in this field is the number 6, Bolt Honoree. Let's take a look at her past performances in Time Form US. Has only tried the turf once, and that was in the Catch a Glimpse, where she was beaten by today's rival Aragona, though it should be noted the pace of that race was pretty fast. They went much faster in the early stages of that race than they did in the Soaring Free for the males on the same card, and I think Bolt Honoree paid the price that day because she just got tired at the end, understandably. We'll see if she can set a more moderate pace here on the stretch out and distance.
It'll be interesting too, knowing that, Arosa's already cross-entered in this spot, and just on that performance alone, will she stick here? Because the pace will probably be hot. And I don't know, she raced blinkers first time. Last time out, she was forwardly placed. So is she going to do something similar and then find herself in a pace meltdown once again? And again, she's a filly facing the boys, so maybe this is the one that they'll take a long look at the other spot and make a judgment call there, after probably talking to Kevin Attard and the connections to see what they want to do. But I think overall, though, it was still a good performance. As you've mentioned, she was at the disadvantage.
Now let's take a look at her Kevin Attard trained stablemate Aragona as she wins the Catch a Glimpse that we were just talking about. And actually, she got a pretty good trip this day in the sense that she saved all the ground, but there were some anxious moments in mid-stretch here as it looked like she had nowhere to go. Ultimately, Rafael Hernandez found room on the inside, and she just bursts on through to win this race pretty convincingly in the end. It's not like she was ever that far off that pace, which was pretty hot and falling apart at the end of this race, and you have to like the way she finishes as she tries to stretch out in distance now.
remember being up there for both days of racing, Saturday and Sunday, and I thought that was one of the most impressive performances. As you mentioned, anxious moments, no room, and for a 2-year-old filly to be kind of boxed in like that, waiting for room, it can be anxious on them. They can get high strung and they can do some goofy things, but she was very professional. And once the seam opened up, I thought she kicked home very nicely. She got a nice figure for the race. And I like that in contrast to the way she was able to graduate at 6.5. She wasn't on the front end. Yes, the pace was fast, but she had to adjust to have horses in front of her. She had to adjust to that. And rating, sometimes horses don't want to do that. So I thought she showed a new dimension.
Yeah, kind of like my boy Prince. She's been improving with each and every start. Will be stretching out in distance for the first time, but certainly has the pedigree to handle it. The number 8 is Western Whirl. Let's take a look at his maiden victory last time at Woodbine, going the 7 furlong distance on the turf. And it was an improvement on his career debut when it just looked like he needed that start for experience. He showed improved speed this day, getting to the front end, and was able to hold the entire field at bay through the lane as he just kept on to the wire. Finished like a horse that should be able to get the mile. There is some sprint pedigree on the dam side, but the twirling candies are so versatile. So just has to avoid getting involved in an early duel with some other runners that want to be forwardly placed.
I even just wonder, is he quick enough to be that forward? I think he'll be close to the pace. I don't know if he's quick enough to be on the lead early. 7/8, I thought the performance, though, was really nice to see him, relax on the front end. And not that it was necessarily slow, but I did think he showed that he was able to get to the front and kind of get things more to his liking in terms of the tempo. And his debut even wasn't bad. When you go back to the debut, I think he raced okay. Obviously, he's going to have to face the rival that won that race, but he's a horse, I think, when we start to go through this field, it's pretty wide open based on what we've seen from these runners so far.
The number 9 is Busick, who broke his maiden on the synthetic and then tried the turf last time in the soaring free. And you want to note in the Timeform USPP is all those blue color-coded pace figures for the soaring free. It's the opposite of the Catch a Glimpse. That was a race that featured a very slow early pace, and it really favored the horses that were towards the front end. That was not the case for this horse, who was trying to close into it, and I think might have run better than that 4th place finish indicates, and he certainly has pedigree to go longer.
Yeah, I was disappointed in his performance, but as you've said, the pace didn't set up for him in the same way. He was also further back than he usually is. So I think that was even more of a disadvantage. So I think the equipment change is promising, and I think the added distance is another thing that should probably work in his favor.
Now, let's take a look at that soaring free that we were just talking about. And the winner of that race was the filly Golden Canary, as she beats the boys on this day. But she was the one who really got the right trip, as they just left her alone on the front end. She was able to set her own fractions, going pretty slowly for that 6.5 furlong distance. And it just turns into a sprint to the wire, and she's able to hold them off as they come through the final quarter in some pretty fast closing splits. We'll see if she's able to get as comfortable this day as she stretches out to the mile with other speed in the field. Again, she's another one who's a filly. She's cross-centered, so we'll see where they decide to run her. But I think she's got some things to prove off that stakes victory last time.
She does, and if I'm not mistaken, Dancing Duchess was her stablemate as well in that race. And I think looking at it, she was shortening up a little bit in the end, and she's going to have to go longer in terms of her post. She's got an outside post here. They're going a mile. I think she can still get the right trip, but just on that alone, I know the figures look really solid. I think a lot had to do with how easy she had things early on. So I'm not sure how I necessarily feel about her in this spot.
And we'll round out this field with the 5th Mark Casse entrant in this summer stakes. That's the number 11 King of the Track. Let's take a look at his maiden victory on debut at Woodbine when he won on the Tapeta surface, going the 5.5 furlongs, and really does nothing wrong this day. I mean, he gets a good trip, stalking a leader before putting that rival away in the late stages. Wins like a horse that has plenty of potential, but this is a big step up in class, going from the synthetic to the turf, stretching out an extra 2.5 furlongs in distance. There are some hurdles for this horse, but he might be okay.
And that race ended up being a little strung out in the end, so I'm not sure necessarily what King of the Track faced in that race. Now I'm going to try longer, as you've mentioned, and the turf. Not a bad performance, but I think others maybe lost out a little bit more appealing, just knowing who they faced and the style and the way that they were able to win those races.
Well, let's throw up our picks for this Grade 1 Summer Stakes, and it's a tough race to make picks for because you don't know who really is going to wind up in this field versus the Natalma. Ashley, I see that you're hoping that Arosa might stay in this race because I assume you might like her in both spots if you're picking her in this Summer Stakes, and she was impressive last time. I think she's a major player.
Yeah, I think she can win either race. I think based on her performance last time out, I just thought she looked really mature for a 2-year-old filly in that race. But I tried to kind of do the math, David. Where do I think she's going? I have no clue because Rafael Hernandez is her go-to rider, is booked on another horse here in the other race. They flip-flop. Johnny's on the Cherie DeVaux horse. I have no idea, but I just wonder in terms of setup. The pace was quick last time out. I think it's going to be quick again. If she can just sit off them, I think she'll have a lot to offer in the stretch on the stretch out.
Yeah, we have similar picks here. I just put the number 2, Carson's Run, on top. I was impressed with the way he tried to battle back inside of that filly Galibrand last time, and he's supposed to get the right kind of pace set up in this Summer Stakes. So the number 2, Carson's Run for me, and the number 7, Arosa for Ashley in the Summer Stakes on Saturday at Woodbine. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.